Hello and welcome back to my Zootopia toy box for the final time. Today I'm going to finish this toy box by showing you how to implement the day-night cycle and the various townsperson generation zones that will finally populate the city with some people. So let's start with the day-night zone. And the first thing we're going to need is the nighttime sky. And I am going to use the Stars over Sahara Square power disc for the sky. And I'll put that down on my base. And this is the nighttime sky I'm going to use. If you do not have the sky, then you can use the Disney Castle Twilight Sky, like we used in my Disneyland toy box for the nighttime sky. But I like Zootopia, so if you have this power disc, you should definitely use it because it fits this world. All right, for the sky change, for the day-night cycle, we're going to need some toys. And by the way, you can see I have placed all of the Creativa toys that were here and moved those out of the way and moved them below the terrain, so they are all down here now. And that took about an hour to do. So a lot of Creativa toys to move. The only ones I didn't move were the level starter because we're going to need that today. And I left the button here for that. And of course, things like the target cameras and the locators and the enemy trail guide and the collection pen and things that should be left out here, I left out here. And trigger areas and so on. But in addition to the level starter over there, we're going to need a couple of other toys here, or a few other toys. So we're going to need two buttons. I'm going to use this one to start the day-night cycle and this one to stop it. We need the sky changer. We need a repeater. And we're going to need 3 logic gates. And I'll explain the significance of those as we go along. The only toy whose properties we need to configure is the repeater. And on the properties for this, just for testing purposes initially, I'm going to set this to 10 seconds. Eventually we're going to want 300. That's what I set on mine. So 60 seconds in a minute for 5 minutes gives us 300. And I found when I'm playing in the toy box that about a 5-minute delay, so about 5 minutes daytime, 5 minutes of nighttime, works pretty well. If you think that's too little, you can increase that if you need to. All right, so first thing we're going to do is on the button that starts this thing, new logic connection when pressed, I'm going to come over and force the daytime sky. And we're going to use the Metroville sky for that, like we've been using. Okay? Because I always want, when I start the day-night cycle, for it to start with the daytime. And then on the action button, new logic connection when pressed, we're going to start the repeater. And so this will go off every 5 minutes, or right now every 10 seconds. The other thing I want to do on here is when the button is pressed, I want to come over to this first logic gate and open it. And what I'm going to do with the logic gate, we're going to use the logic gate to toggle between the different skies. So we're going to open and close the gate, and depending on whether the gate is opened or closed is going to depend on which sky we set. So initially I want to put this in the open state. All right? That's everything the button needs to do. We just want to force the daytime sky, start the repeater, make sure that gate's in the open state. Now, on the repeater, a new logic connection on repeat, we're going to attempt to input into this gate. Okay? And by the way, every time you start the repeater and turn it on, it will automatically broadcast the very first repeat signal. It's not going to wait 10 seconds or 5 minutes or whatever you set for the interval in here in the properties. The very first repeat will go out as soon as you turn this on, which is why I wanted to make sure this was in the open state. Okay, so this is going to attempt to input into this gate. And right now, by default, it's in the open state. So, on output from this gate, new logic connection on output, we'll come over to the sky changer, and we're going to make sure again that it's the Metroville sky. Okay? And I'm doing that again because this this repeater is going to automatically broadcast our first repeat. And so we're just making sure between the button and this that we get our daytime sky. Okay. And then on the logic gate, a new logic connection on output. Ideally, I would like to be able to turn around and have this gate invoke itself to close itself, but I can't do that, so that's why we have these two gates. So on this first one, we'll input. We're just going to use this as a pass-through. So on output from that gate, we'll turn around and close the gate. Okay? All right. So now 10 seconds later, or 5 minutes or whatever, the repeater will go off again, and it will attempt to input into the gate, but now the gate's closed. So on the gate this time, new logic connection, when the input is blocked because the gate is closed, we'll come over to our sky changer, scroll down to hexagonal power disks, and select stars over Sahara Square. And that'll change to the nighttime sky. And on the logic gate, a new logic connection. When the input is blocked, once again, I'd like to turn around, come back to here and have it open itself, but since I can't, we'll use this gate to do that. So we'll input into that gate, new logic connection on output from that gate, turn around and reopen this gate. Okay? And that's it. It's pretty straightforward. We want, when this thing starts, just to have this go off every so often, invoke the gate to change the sky and then toggle itself, and then the next time when this invokes it, it'll do the other thing and then toggle itself, and so on. So let's try it out. Oh, and by the way, we want to use the other button here to stop this process. So a new logic connection when pressed. Come over to the repeater and turn it off. All right, now let's try it out. All right, so we push the button. Good morning. So now we have our daytime sky, and in about 10 seconds, this should change. There we go. So now we're on our nighttime sky, and in about 10 seconds it should switch again. And there it goes. And now it's just going to go continue to cycle between the two skies. Let's go ahead and stop the process here. So we verified that it works. Now we can come over to our repeater, go under the properties, take the rate to 300, which is what I want. So every 5 minutes have the sky change. And we want to tie this in to the level starter. And so what we'll do is on the level starter, new logic connection on catalyze, have this come over, and since this button's already kicking off everything, we'll just use the level starter to invoke this button. And there you go. There's the day-night cycle. And every 5 minutes it'll change from day to night or night to day. And at this point you can move the sky changer, the repeater, and these 3 logic gates below the terrain. With the rest of the Creativitoys though, I'd recommend keeping the buttons because you never know when you may need to turn off the day-night cycle. And you can either move these below the terrain or you can push them up against this building and move them out of the way, but that's up to you. All right, the last thing we want to do in this toy box is to populate the city, because right now it is very empty. And unfortunately, we can't just dump dozens and dozens of townspeople into the toy box, because that will very quickly eat up all of our remaining memory and also introduce a lot of lag. And so what we're going to do is divide up the city into multiple zones. And I've done this before for other toy boxes, but for those of you who haven't seen those videos, basically, whenever a player enters one of these zones, we'll generate the townspeople for that zone, and when all the players leave that zone, we'll remove the townspeople from that zone. And that'll limit the number of townspeople that we have in our toy box at any given time, thus conserving resources and memory. Because there's no point in having any townspeople in an area of the toy box where there are no players. All right, so this will be the first zone, the downtown area, in this open area here. Our second zone will be over in Sahara Square. And I've got some creativitoys down that I'll review in a moment for each zone. Our third zone will be over here in this part of Sahara Square, and if you built the other version of the toy box, these will be the controls for Tundra Town. And my fourth zone is over in this corner of the toy box, and in the other version of the toy box, these will be the controls for the Rainforest District. Okay? Now for each zone, you need the same 3 controls. You need a dynamic trigger, a friendly wave generator, and a counter. And I've placed a locator that we're going to use for the center of our zone. And I'm going to show you how to hook up one of the zones. The other 3 are the same way. So you only need to see this once. And by the way, I have logic diagrams on my blog for all these things today. I forgot to mention that earlier, but the link once again is in the video description. So to set up this zone, we're going to connect our dynamic trigger to this locator. And we're going to set the properties with the target as the locator. And the trigger distance for this zone, I'm going to set to 144. All right. For the friendly wave generator, I've connected this up to 2 locators over there. And a locator over at that building and one in the park. I'm reusing those. And the one over in front of the door at police headquarters. I'm reusing all those locators. And for the wave on this one, I've configured this with 5 characters: Animal, Robin Hood, Agent P, Donald Duck, and Fozzie Bear. I tried to pick animals that are wearing clothes, because it's Zootopia. If you're on a system with more memory and resources, you could maybe pick 6 or 7 or 8. I wouldn't do too many more than that, though, because at least on my Wii U, I have found that the more townspeople you generate with a friendly wave generator, the more lag it creates. I don't know why that is. If you want more townspeople, and that happens to you as well, you could use 2 friendly wave generators with 5 per generator. Then you'd have 10 townspeople wandering around, but don't add too many, because we have vehicles, we have enemies, and other townspeople that we're going to be generating for the missions, so you can't go too crazy here. On the properties for the friendly wave generator, everything stays the same, but you take the generation delay to 0. And the counter is going to be used to keep track of the number of players in the zone. And the properties on this all stay the same, except we're going to turn off the visible display. Okay. So on the dynamic trigger, which sets up a radius around this locator, and by the way, the radius extends to about out to here and about out to here. Okay. So when the player enters that area, on the dynamic trigger, we want to do a new logic connection when entered. By player any, we will generate the townspeople in this zone. And we also want to increment the counter. So when entered, by player any will increment the counter by 1. And on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when exited by player any. So when a player leaves this zone, we want to decrement the counter by 1. And on the counter, a new logic connection when 0 is reached, so all the players have left the zone, we'll come over to our friendly wave generator and defeat the wave. And that will take them out. And there we go. So now we can come out of the editor, and as soon as we do, we have entered the zone. And that should generate some townspeople here, and it does. So we've got Agent P over here, we got Robin Hood over there, it looks like. Donald's over there at the police headquarters. We got 2 characters over here. And now they're starting to wander around a little bit. So there we go. And when we leave the zone, that takes them out of the toy box. So there we go. Now the other zones are set up the exact same way. So this one over here, the dynamic trigger is connected to that locator. And on the properties for this, trigger distance is 96. That distance goes to about this point here. And about this point here. And about this point here. And on the friendly wave generator, I've connected it up to the locators that you see there. So there's one over in front of the door over here, and another one over at the door over there. Trying to make it look like they're coming out of buildings and things, so it doesn't look too surprising when they appear. And these are the characters that I selected for this area, for this zone. Over here, this locator, or this dynamic trigger, is connected to that locator. And on the properties for this, the trigger distance is 72. You may have to increase this a little bit when you're in the other version of the toy box, and this is in Tundra Town, because the road will be a little further over in that direction. But you can play around with that if you need to. I don't think it'll need to go any higher than 96. And this is connected to the locators that you see there. And there should have actually been 5. So let me connect one of these. We'll put it over on this one. 5 locators. And for the wave on this one, these are the animals that I chose. If you're in the other version of the toy box, you may want to save Baloo and King Louie for the Rainforest District and use some of the cold weather animals, but this is what I used here. And for the final zone, in this version of the toy box, I'm limiting the animals down to this corner. In the other version of the toy box, though, the Rainforest District stretches over to here, and so I would recommend putting the locator about on this edge of the intersection in that toy box. In this one, it's connected to the locator that's placed there. I'm reusing that. And in this version of the toy box, I have the trigger distance set to 96. You may want that set to 144 or maybe 120 or something like that in the Rainforest District. And for the wave on this one, these are the animals that I chose. And this is connected to locators like you see there. I'm reusing all of those. And I added one more in front of that door there. Now once you have all of those connected, you can move those Creativitoys below the terrain. And then you'll be done. And with that, my Zootopia toy box is finished. I hope you've enjoyed this series, and if so, please give this video a like and leave a comment to let me know if you built this toy box and what you think of it when you have a chance to play it for yourself. Also, if you like Disney Infinity and my toy box designs, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'm not sure when I will be back with a new toy box for you. It's going to depend on what happens with my wife's upcoming surgery, but I'm sure I will eventually have time to work on something new. In the meantime, enjoy Zootopia and take care of yourself.